everyone, and welcome back to the Tastemakers. This is the podcast where we sample all of what's happening in the world of television and film and let you know what's going on, what's worth checking out, what you maybe should skip, and what we think of all of it. I'm your host, Taran Armstrong, and with me, as always, Grace Leeder. How you doing, Grace?
I'm doing well. Some shows that got canceled, some shows that are maybe returning, lots of shows that are for sure returning that look fun. So excited to chat it through with you, Taran.
Yes, kind of like a little bit of an update week here. There's not like any like super major news. We actually just missed last week some big news. We had talked a lot about the Acolyte, and shortly after we recorded last week, news came out. Canceled. It's done. No Acolyte season 2.
This is a bit of a I think it's a bummer, and also I do think this show is so interesting to talk about, Taran, because I think this is a show that had moments of like, oh, fun, and had things that were like, I think even if you were, it had its moments that were not as strong, and maybe more of those than the moments that were good. And then there's this toxicity wrapped up around the show, and it almost feels like, in ways, like the feeling I saw when the news came out was like, oh no, like these are the type of shows that, because there's toxicity, maybe not because there's toxicity, but because of what it's taking a swing, it's trying something different, it's different types of Star Wars, and that's a show that maybe should get a longer leash, even if it was like not perfect to try, and yet Disney seems to have bailed on it rather quickly. So complicated, I think, to talk about the cancellation of the Acolyte.
Yeah, I saw there was this. There's many sort of proposed reasons for the cancellation, including the toxicity surrounding the show itself, the audience reaction. We had heard that the ratings were doing pretty well, but clearly not good enough. There's an article here from Forbes that says the very obvious reason that Disney canceled the Acolyte, it wasn't the toxic dude bros. And in this article, they propose that it really was just cost per the cost to audience ratio, essentially, that it was very expensive, and that there wasn't a high enough audience to justify the cost. They compared a lot of the other Star Wars properties out there. The Acolyte was one of the most expensive, I think just under Andor being the most expensive, I believe. And it had some of the lowest ratings comparatively, even though the ratings were still pretty high. Average views per episode they have in this table at 9.3 million. But that was, that does not touch the higher ratings of like Mandalorian up at close to 20 million, over 20 million for Mandalorian. There was close to 20 million for Kenobi. Book of Boba Fett had 15, so it was lower, but it does also look like in general the ratings are just starting to drop for these Star Wars property shows. And so this might just be one of the first ones where, just like, for a budget that's higher than all of those other shows, still continuing to drop in ratings, it's just not, the math just isn't there, seemingly.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to think, like, when The Force Awakens came out, I feel like that was one of my favorite movie-going experiences ever. I wasn't even a humongous Star Wars person, and to be kind of caught up in this nostalgia of that. And Star Wars has always felt like, until recently, to me, like a movie franchise. And they obviously have pivoted. I mean, this is Disney's thing, and I just wonder, I don't know how, I mean, they're operating under the same umbrella, but in terms of Marvel versus like Lucas, the Lucas projects, in terms of they both, it do feel like are sort of having to pivot away from the pivot they made to television. It does seem like there are, I think, 4 Star Wars movies officially confirmed that are coming. Andor season 2 is coming. I don't think anything other than the animated shows are confirmed as being on television, but you have Mandalorian and Grogu, which is coming to a movie screen. So it's being shifted away from television. And then there's 3 movies that I think might all I can't, I'm having trouble keeping track, but I think those are all going to be maybe potentially all trilogies. And I don't know how that feels like a lot, but I think they're all 3 movies are set at vastly. So one is like a Ray movie, and one is like way before, whatever. They're all set at 3 different times. So you could see that they could, like, if any of them are successful, probably expand them out. And to me, I do feel like that feels like where Star Wars maybe should live. Like, I wonder, Taran, what is the 90 to 120-minute version of the Acolyte movie look like? And is it more compelling in a way in terms of some of the, I feel like there's a lot of fluff in the Acolyte. There's some like
Yep.
pacing and timing issues. And I actually think it's a pretty good and interesting story that if it was contained to a movie, I feel like might have been like a little bit of a sneaky hit. And
I completely agree.
yeah, and instead we kind of get this like, lackluster TV show that I think had moments of like very fun, but maybe not quite good enough to be a weekly TV show on Disney Plus.
I think The Acolyte as a movie, take all of the good parts of that show, remove all of the bad parts, it's actually a pretty good movie. And I did not enjoy the show, but I think that like it had enough good parts in it that it actually works really well as a movie, and could even set up a sequel. Like, it could be a trilogy of movies. But as a show, it just did not work. But I don't even know if that was really, again, like the issue. I think that in general, it's more so that none of these shows are really working. Kenobi has tons of people watching it, but did anybody like Kenobi? Like, I'm sure
Once
there are
again,
some.
interesting
Uh,
things that mostly is surrounded by like,
yeah, and then like Book of Boba Fett and all of that.
I
Like,
forgot Skeleton Crew is coming too. I forgot that that's a TV show that's coming this year. The
yes,
Jude Law show. No.
I think Andor by far has the most amount of hype surrounding it, and very justifiably so. I thought that was a fantastic season of television. But that one also like struggled to find as much of an audience and was very expensive. And so you even have to wonder, like, given the downward trajectory, would Andor have even been renewed for a season 2 if it was made now? I'm not sure, because there doesn't seem to be as much faith in these properties. And so you got to be careful with this, and I feel like they have been so scattershot with the Star Wars universe, and they're just not hitting. And it's been talked to death. I think a huge part of it is just like they just keep retreading the same things over and over. There are so many kinds of stories you can tell in the Star Wars universe. I think that part of why Mandalorian season 1 was so popular in the first place and really kicked off this new era of Star Wars TV shows is because it felt so different. And then they very quickly turned it into something that was not different. Theoretically, Book of Boba Fett was also different, but man, that one just sucked. It just didn't work. So
It's funny. I think a lot of the ones that have not worked are mostly stuff where they are trying to continue telling a story that has been told. So I do think
yeah,
like Obi-Wan and to a degree Ahsoka, like I think people really love the Clone Wars Ahsoka. I've watched the Clone Wars. I like it as well. You're like building off of something in a way that Mando was only slightly doing, and the more it kind of became, I mean, it's so interesting. Actually, I was just at I'm gonna hype this up for like the umpteenth time today, but Kevin Jacobs wrote a really great article in the Confession newsletter that came out today that is about fandom. I was joined him at Fan Expo for on Friday. He was there all weekend, and I think sometimes we believe our reality TV fandom can be toxic. Taran, as you talk about Big Brother every day, but he was talking about like there's toxic fandoms all over the place, and if you sort of like those people are there celebrating what they love. It does feel like to a degree these things, the more they got intertwined into the larger story, the more it feels like you can just feel like get weighed down by that, I think. Whereas the beginning of Mando and even Grogu is so funny because it's obviously so attached to a Star Wars thing in Yoda and baby Yoda, but there's a way in which it felt different.
Yeah.
And Star Wars is very tropey. Like I think it's like the lone cub trope, something like that, is one of my favorite tropes, where it's like an adult has to take care of a younger, like a child, and that's basically just what Mando and Grogu is just him taking care of Baby Yoda. So it's very tropey, but there's just a way it did feel different. And the more it was like, even I think an amazing moment in Mando is the Luke Skywalker moment, and even then it feels like the aftermath of that is like, oh, but now we're like stuck in the thing, we're bogged
Yeah.
down in it. um and so Andor did not feel like that, even though it's based on a movie, but a movie that is standalone from everything else, and it does have Darth Vader at the end of it, but like, I don't know, felt really original and unique. And it is interesting that show is renewed, because there's a different sentiment around that one. And I it's funny because I do think, Taran, I think that article you listed, I don't think it's the toxicity of Acolyte that got it canceled. I do think it's the cost. But it is interesting when you compare that to Andor, which had almost the reverse sentiment, I felt like, of like people being like,
Mm.
everybody needs to watch the show because it's actually amazing Star Wars. And maybe that's rose-colored glasses, and there were people at the time being like, actually, Andor is woke or whatever. But I don't know. It feels like maybe there is a piece to it, because I feel like Andor had the opposite thing going for it, of like
I've yeah.
people discovering it. This
I
gem.
feel like the very positive critical reception certainly can save a show, I think.
Which Acolyte didn't have, I guess.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
that, like, I don't know that like the hate for it necessarily contributed toward its cancellation, but the fact that they're like, it's not like the people who weren't being toxic toward it were like, no, but this is high art.
Right.
Like, this is
Right.
going to start winning awards. Not quite.
Yeah, we all felt
Um,
like it was. I feel like between I remember you and Josh talking about it on one of the first episodes, and everybody who's like, every time you want to critique it, you're like, I'm not critiquing it for the reasons everyone else is, but this scene was bad. This was just bad. So unfortunate. But I think one of the points, like, I think, on one hand, it's like, oh, well, that show that they took a chance on in terms of like a female showrunner running a Star Wars thing, they did give it a huge budget, and then it just didn't work. And there's a way you can positively spin that. And on the other hand, there's the way in which I think I saw some people feeling like, oh man, like there's so much else out there that gets to be bad and gets to keep going. And it's
mhm.
unfortunate this is a one that, again, like, was not perfect, and so then ended up being canceled, but I think rightly attributed to the fact that it was so expensive to run.
You can also make the argument that like this was a swing, because it
I
is
agree.
so removed from the timeline. But like, without spoiling anything, it's not that far removed in terms of like the lore.
The
And
last
I
thing
think
we see is tying it back into the lore.
right.
Yeah.
And like my like sort of the way that they were telling the story just feels very familiar. Nothing about like when you watch Andor, it does not feel like anything else you've seen in the Star Wars universe.
Yeah.
It feels like a prestige television show that is set in the Star Wars universe. The like Andor, despite being so much more intertwined with the actual timeline and events of the movies that
Yeah,
have
the
been out there
OG movie.
forever,
Yeah. Yeah. Mhm.
feels so much more of a swing, so different to the established Star Wars feel than something like Acolyte did, despite Acolyte being theoretically so much more removed from that major storyline. And I think that's the main thing. And like when I think about Star Wars and the kinds of stories that Star Wars can tell, I think about like the video games I've played.
Yeah.
Like because I never was like super into the books, and I know that there's a lot of extended universe stuff that people love from the books. But like for
Mhm.
me, it's playing video. It's playing Knights of the Old Republic, and even more recently, the Cal stuff. I don't remember what it's called.
Yes. Yes.
But like they tell some interesting stories there, some of which are connected to the main, plot line. Something like Knights of the Old Republic is such a cool story, so far removed from anything else. I know a lot of people have been like begging for that to be adapted. I would certainly be down for that. But like, there's a lot of, you know, the whole point is that there's this big universe built out. There's this, it's like the world building of Star Wars, while derivative, is really cool and iconic. And there are so many different things you can do inside of that world. And I think that the way that they're going about it is like, oh, well, we'll do a, like father figure takes care of young child story. which initially works until they tie it back into the main thing and kind of like make it more of a main thing story. We'll do a like, okay, we'll remove it from the timeline, but it's about a Jedi that is not quite a Jedi who is like maybe fatherless and struggles with their like, are they going to go to the dark side? Are they gonna? And it's like, okay, this is technically a different story, but it feels very familiar. So it's like that's it feels like they are trapped between this desire to do something ambitious and try things that are new, but then not going all the way because they are too tied to the established stuff that's actually happening. And that was the problem with the new trilogy as well, where it's like, let's do something really established. Let's just remake A New Hope, then we'll try something new, and then we'll panic and go back, and it's just such a mess. And
What
I know
franchise is
yeah.
not having this problem, Taran? Of like, this is the Marvel stuff of like,
Yep.
because I feel like we had been talking about Marvel stuff and being like, it actually needs to be more disconnected. And then I talked with Jason, and he's like, actually, no, the solution is connecting it more. And I'm like, that's probably. No,
I kind of do agree with that. To some, like, I think the thing that's missing in Marvel right now is it feels directionless.
Yeah.
And it needs like things need to come back home. And I think that the announcement of the Avengers movie coming up, I think that's their chance to tie things back together.
I agree.
But like, but in the same way, I think that they need to be doing different things with, and I think this is what they're doing. I have hope for Marvel right now because like I'm seeing previews for the Captain America thing, and it feels very like
I love that. I think it looks
political
fun. That looks great.
thriller. And so so I think there's something there, and I think that Star Wars needs to do something similar where they need to actually branch out and commit to doing separate things. They probably will need to tie them back together at some point, but I don't think they're beholden to that in the same way that Marvel is, because Star Wars has a more like connected universe. Marvel gets all messy because of their multiverse stuff, and so things start to feel like they don't matter because they're not part of the same universe anymore, or it doesn't feel that way. Whereas Star Wars, it can all be connected to the timeline, and you can bring it all back. And so I think that there's more potential there. They just haven't tapped into it.
For me, I think it is this the movie stuff that they have planned. I think feels to me like that can be a way to make it work. I think Favreau is doing the Mandalorian and Grogu movie, which will come out in 2026, and then there are these 3 movies. One of them is a Dave Filoni. He's directing and writing it. I can't remember which timeline that's in. There's been all these rumors about the Taika movie, all this other stuff, but I believe there's like these 3 movies, one of them being the Rey movie, and then 2 of them set, and they're all set in different timelines. And I feel like that could be helpful. I think part of the thing, even with Marvel, was their move to television was, I would agree that it needs to be connected, but it also feels like a lot when you have so much that needs to be connected. And so I think that like limiting what they're doing. So basically, like there's all the animated stuff that Star Wars is going to do. They'll have Skeleton Crew out in December, and then Andor season 2 next year, probably. That's, that feels reasonable to me to feel like, okay, I can like, map out what's going on. The video games we're talking about, I think, were Fallen Order and then Survivor, I think, is the new game. I have not played either of those, but I've been very tempted. During at Fan Expo this weekend, I got to play X-Wing for the first time. Have you ever played X-Wing? It was very fun. Tabletop game. You play as starships. I was Kenobi, and I got to fight General Grievous, and it was a tremendous time, and I highly recommend people figuring out how to go play X-Wing. Probably if you go to like a local board game store, look for like a Warhammery type store, or like D&D. They probably should have some X-Wing stuff and find some people to play with. It was very fun, a very tactical, nitty-gritty game that I enjoyed getting to play at Fan Expo. I really nerded out on Friday with Kevin Jacobs, who was dressed as Vision all day. So
maybe my hot take is that I think that Marvel crashed when they introduced time travel and multiverse. I think that like, because that's basically in my eyes that was like Endgame. And I feel like
Endgame, and then into the TV, that's into the new phase, and then
exactly
the TV stuff. So.
And I just feel, and I get it, because like, listen, I think that's a hot take because it's such an integral part of the comic universe, is that there's so many different, the multiverse and all of that stuff. But I just think it starts getting so messy when you have too much of that. It just feels like, how do you connect these things? There's too many different realities, different versions of people, different universes to save, and it doesn't have the epic feel anymore because it's too big for your mind to even really comprehend. And I think that's part of the issue there, and that's where I think Star Wars has the advantage. But not for the Acolyte, because the Acolyte is done, and I'll be curious to see if they go back to the TV well, because I think there's potential there. But if the potential is Andor, and Andor is one of the least watched shows that they had, maybe TV is just not the place for Star Wars.
Do you think? I mean, I'm going to ask you a pretty big question. I think that maybe like almost impossible because I don't know if I have an answer. But do you think there's a franchise right now that's in like the healthiest spot? Like, which of these like major between like your Marvel? Like one thing we haven't talked about this, and that's mostly because like I think it's complicated to talk about it in a way that I feel comfortable talking about it. But like, I think it's really interesting that like HBO is doing a Harry Potter show, and what they're basically doing is just rebooting the whole thing. They're just redoing the books in television form. I think that's interesting because it's like you can dive into the books in a way that the movies like I think it's one of the best like and again it's all tangled up with my feelings about the creator of this thing and whether or not we should be giving her money, but there's a way in which like, oh, it is kind of interesting to think like, okay, now take the books and actually adapt them into television shows instead of movies and reboot it. I think that's really interesting. And they have tried to put out stuff recently. That also got really, caught up in, there's a lot of not Robert Downey Jr. I'm so sorry. Johnny Depp stuff, what's like the healthiest franchise right now? I don't know if I have an answer to this on it. It's like secretly, it's probably something that we're not, which is like Jurassic Park just does fine every time it releases a new movie. Like it's not the most exciting franchise, but it's just like they just make like almost $1 billion of it.
I mean, it crushed when it came back initially. I feel like it's been. I could be wrong. I feel like it's been like.
I think the last one still did pretty good. I think I'm gonna look this up. Avatar is like, but I feel like the joke there is that like it has no cultural cachet. Like, do you remember what happened in the last Avatar movie?
It's the same thing as what happened in the first Avatar.
That's true.
Which is the same thing as what happened in Dances with Wolves.
That's true. Yeah, that's very true. So yeah, I don't know. People should tweet at us. What's the healthiest like movie IP franchise right now?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Like, I mean, in terms of genre stuff, I feel like they're all kind of floundering right now. It's still like one of the like biggest spaces to be in is like genre universe stuff.
Yeah, I am sorry. Jurassic World Dominion, which is the last Jurassic Park movie, which came out in 2022, made $1 billion. So I like, this is the thing is that like it's similarly to Avatar. I feel like has enough that people will be like, I'll go see a Jurassic, like I'll see a dinosaur movie, and so it makes a ton of money. But then the movies aren't like that good enough to like have cultural like sway.
I think that's the thing. I think that like the most successful franchises right now are the ones that are still keeping it simple, and they just have a movie every couple of years, or maybe a show every couple of years. I think that when you try to expand too quickly, which is what's happening, I think, with Star Wars and what they did with Marvel, where they just went like too much at once. I think that's where you start to flounder. But the thing is that like, is it floundering? There's still some of the most successful franchises. It's just that them trying to expand so much, they're running into some walls. But like, the Acolyte going on for a season and being canceled, is that worse than a show that never got made in the Jurassic world? You know what I mean? Like I don't know.
I don't know either. Think I forgot about Harry Potter's that they also have Wizarding World, like the stuff that's also attached to like theme. That's the thing with Disney is that they actually like their movie stuff can be a little bit more like although that's not Disney, but Disneyland, Disney World can be a little bit like they can kind of have some misses because they can just like capitalize on all the IP that they have that can put in a park that people come to. But apparently Pokemon is the most
I was thinking Pokemon
is the biggest like value, like total revenue or so. There's a Wikipedia article here that's probably not the best metric I can look at, but Pokemon is like $30 billion worth $30 billion more than the second one, which is Mickey Mouse.
Yeah, I was going to say Pokemon, but but in terms of like the fan perception of Pokemon, I think they would also probably say it's a little bit floundering.
Yeah, what are they even
Um,
doing right now? I don't even
because
know.
of the there's some issues with the games as always,
Oh, okay.
but it is a very, very successful. It's just the market, the merchandising is so good for Pokemon.
That
All
is
right,
fair.
what else do we have to talk about?
Well, we talked about a cancellation. There's a lot of
Mhm.
rumors swirling that a show that seemed to wrap up their show quite well is actually, surprise, coming back, which I think these conversations are actually tied in quite perfectly, because basically my thesis statement on, like, franchise stuff was basically like, those people get paid a lot of money to try and figure it out. But I do get the balance of them trying to figure out, like, how much can I make you pay for things before you get sick of the thing and don't want to pay for it anymore? How much can I put out before, like, we get these like critically panned things? Ted Lasso, I thought, had a pretty good season finale. And this is a thing that I think, like, the stock on Ted Lasso, you probably wanted to sell after season one. At the end of season one, I feel like it was at its peak. And I feel like it's been a little bit, for people, not necessarily me, but for the general public, diminishing returns on every season since then. But it did seem to wrap up. And then, surprise, surprise, there was some news this weekend that season 4 looked like it was likely happening. And I do think there's been a smidgen of misunderstanding in terms of what happened and what it means. Because I think the headlines were like, Ted Lasso was coming back. And what actually happened was they had a few people on their crew. And these are likely people who are on, for some reason that I don't even fully understand, on specific contracts that are different from other people on the show. And this was Hannah Waddingham, Brett Goldstein, so Rebecca and Roy Kent, respectively, as well as the guy who plays Higgins. They were on specific contracts that they probably had a date in which they needed to trigger that they could have them back for a season 4 at a specific rate or whatever, in a specific agreement to have them back. And they did that, which then I think launched people to say, oh, Ted Lasso's returning. But the thing is that nobody else on the show necessarily is lined up for season 4, including Ted Lasso, Jason Sudeikis. So I think that this is a little, like, headline grabby of like, oh, it's coming back. And I think people should not necessarily get their hopes up, because I don't know that it's necessarily returning. I think this is just a contractual thing that Apple TV did, that if Jason Sudeikis was like, actually, you know what? I miss playing Ted Lasso. I would like to come back and play Ted Lasso. They now have these people who they feel like are pretty important to be on the show, in Rebecca and Roy and all those people, locked in to an agreement. But I know that you sort of, like, I think you're more in line with, like, the show kind of wasn't what I don't know. I don't want to put words in your mouth in terms of, like, how you feel about Ted Lasso.
I loved the first season. The second season, I was holding out hope, and it was fine. I feel like I can look up. I can always, like, lock down exactly how I felt about something by looking up what I gave it as a rating.
Uh-huh.
The first season, I gave a 9 out of 10. I loved the
Yeah.
first season. The
Yeah.
second season, 7 out of 10. I was like, it's still good, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The third season, I didn't finish. So
Yeah, that's brutal, Taran. I mean, yeah, nothing speaks to our differences more than the fact that I have to, like, try to figure out how to stop watching shows when I don't like them anymore. Not that I did like Ted Lasso season 3, and you're like, yeah, I didn't finish Ted Lasso.
like, because it's like usually 3 seasons in, especially if the first season was a 9 out of 10, you're gonna like, the momentum alone, I want to finish it out. But it felt like such a every single episode.
Interesting.
Every time I was like, okay, should I watch Ted Lasso? I guess so. I guess I'll go. And then every episode was so long. I was very frustrated with
They were
it.
long. They were long.
I feel like season 1 was such a great season. But honestly, from my perspective, the show still does well enough in the ratings. Apple needs a hit. If they want to, like, beat this dead horse, I don't care. I'm not going to watch it. But if they need it for their, service, like, I'll go for it.
They don't need to beat a dead horse. They also have slow horses coming back next week. So they have a horse that they can be. Yeah, which is a great show. We'll talk about it a little bit. But so I don't know. Where did Ted Lasso, in your estimate, like, where did it go wrong? Because I do worry a little bit about, because I'm a little bit of a Ted Lasso defender the whole way through. But I worry about bringing the show back for a 4th season, feeling like it had a pretty good 3-season arc.
I feel like it already passed its prime. It's already dead, so you might as well just keep going.
Just keep giving Bill Lawrence money.
Yeah.
Jason Sudeikis money. See, the thing for me that I feel like uh, I'm a sucker for. I've talked about this about Scrubs specifically, a show that you think you're coming to laugh and then it punches you. And Ted is the epitome to me, and maybe one of the best iterations of all time of a sad clown character who has this hokey nature about him. And I really do. I think there's a world where the TV character I relate most to in the world is Ted Lasso, and I think that Ted has daddy issues, in which like I do not. If my dad's listening, hello, I love you, you're great. It's not my relationship with my dad. It is like, for me, like trans queer stuff, depression, anxiety, all the stuff that people have in the world, in which I feel like I do try to move through the world in a similar way that Ted Lasso does, which is like I want to make people laugh. I want to like I was at an event one time, and so my friend's parents were like, "That great, it's just so funny and helpful." And I was like, "Yeah, I think those are the two things in the world I want to be," And so I relate to that, and then feeling like every once in a while you're like putting up the facade, like it's like sometimes I'm trying to be funny because I'm actually trying to like cheer myself up, and so I relate so much with that. And I thought that they did a really good job of like, the first season is this sort of thing where I feel like you think what's happening, but really there's actually no villain at all in this season of the show. And season 2, I actually think is, it's been a little bit compared to Star Wars to being a sort of like the Empire Strikes Back moment of sort of there's a similar thing I think that's going on with Nick in that show. I definitely can get if people don't love it, but I liked the way it went deeper into these people in this world. There are times where it does feel like it's like pretty cartoonish. I don't know. I guess again, I'm like wondering like, what is it about the show that you felt like, it was past its prime? What was it doing differently in the secondary seasons and third season that it was not doing in season 1?
I mean, I can give you one major thing we've talked about
Please.
already, but season 1, total runtime in 10 episodes, 5 hours, 9
Okay.
minutes.
Yeah, fair.
Season 3, 12 episodes, runtime 11 hours, 44 minutes, more than double the length of season 1. I'm looking at the runtimes of some of these episodes. Season 1, it's 30 minutes, 29 minutes, 31 minutes. Season 3, it's 53 minutes, 1 hour, 6 minutes, 1 hour, 1 minute, 1 hour, 13, 1 hour, 19. Like, this is not House of the Dragon. This is not Game of Thrones. Why are these episode lengths so long? And it's just like I just didn't feel like, if season 3 was 30-minute episodes, I probably watched the whole thing and I probably like it because there is some good stuff there. There are some cool character arcs. There are some fun moments. I do like these people. But man, it just lingered. it just dragged its feet. And I had such an issue. And like I think a lot of the stuff too, and I'm being very mean to it right now, but like it
Can be
really
mean
feel
to
like
it.
it fell in love with itself. And like all of the things that I liked about season 1, where it was like, look at this like non-toxic positive masculinity, like this really interesting, like it's a comedy show, but it has all these hints of other stuff that's really cool and positive, and I like a lot of it. By season 3, it was like, look how positive I am. I am so woke and positive and non-toxic, and here are all of the ways that we will explicitly spell out to you how great we are. And like I'm not like it's better than the alternative, but like it just felt like the subtext became the text, and I was barely even watching like entertainment anymore. So plus they had episodes where Beard was walking around the city for like stoned off his head or whatever.
It's funny because I think that the first part of it, I'm like, oh, I disagree. I'm for me, it's worth it to like spend an hour with these characters. I think that they're so compelling, but I understand if you're not. And then also I'm like, yeah, I hate the Beard episode. So that's fine. The more we don't know about Beard, I thought the better. But that was
and it's also like
take too.
Yeah. I think I talked about it last week actually too, where it's just like I feel like the show just doesn't know what it wants to be. It's trying to be too serious while still being a comedy instead of being a comedy that is sometimes serious. And that is I think the major thing. I think you can have shows that are like
Mm.
that. I think you can have shows that do that, but I don't think that is the strength of this show. And I think that it just didn't work for me. But listen, again, I'm happy for it to continue on and for people to watch it, and especially if they enjoy it.
Yeah,
And
my
if they
piece is
don't,
that
I don't.
they don't. Yeah, my piece is not that I don't think that there's no possibility it returns. I actually think it's a tremendous cash cow for Apple TV, and probably if they were smart, they would renew it. I think that though there's like a chance that like this news does not necessarily mean Ted Lasso, or a show that is called Ted Lasso with, or a show that's called Ted Lasso with Ted Lasso in it is necessarily coming back. I already know that Jamie Tart apparently is very unlikely to be in season 4 if it was to return. And already I feel like at that point, Jamie Tart is like probably not the most important key to the cog in the show to make it return if you're coming back. But I don't want, again, a Bill Lawrence analogy. I don't know if I said this on or off pod. This should not be Scrubs season 9. If you're bringing the show back, it needs to be basically Ted Lasso, I think. So, yeah, as Jess in the chat says, Ted Lasso without Jamie would be poupe. So, yeah.
All right. I do want to quickly say I forgot to mention this last week, but we talked about Borderlands and how there was this pseudonym writer,
Yes,
Joe Crombie, which was incorrectly at the time credited as Joe Abercrombie on IMDb. Like fully, it linked to Joe Abercrombie, the fantasy writer. And has now been corrected. It now says Joe Crombie, and if you click on it, the only writing credit is Borderlands, so no longer says Joe Abercrombie. As far as I've been able to tell, no, this was not Joe Abercrombie. There's no real reason to think it is, other than the fact that the name is Joe Crombie.
And he came out and was like, "I didn't write it."
Well,
right? He said it, right?
I don't think that Joe Abercrombie has even said anything about it.
I thought that happened, but I'm wrong.
But I know that what's his name from Chernobyl?
Craig Mazin. Is this
Craig
the thing you're thinking about
Mazin,
it? Yeah.
who was attached to Borderlands.
Yeah.
There was and is a lot of suspicion that he was Joe Crombie and that he put in the pseudonym to distance himself from this movie. He has said,
yeah, he's not. It's not.
That is not me. That is not my pseudonym. But if it's not him, people aren't exactly sure who it is. There are some other suspects, but the reality is right now, this is a mystery. Nobody knows for sure who Joe Crombie is. And Joe Crombie seems to have no motivation to reveal themselves because the movie bombed and everyone thinks the writing was awful. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
From Jordan Rumi from World of Real, who writes, so who is Joe Crombie? It turns out absolutely nobody effing knows. They go into that it could be Mazin. There were other writers who were hired to write rewrites on Borderlands. It could just be a combination of them. This article thinks their money is on Mazin. So, yeah.
Wow. So interesting stuff there. But speaking of movies that did not do well, there were a couple of movies I think that came out this weekend that did not do well.
I didn't watch either of them. I had a very busy weekend, Taran, and I cannot fit in either The Crow or Blink Twice into my schedule. These did not do well, Taran, at all. The Crow, a long time project to get The Crow back on a movie screen, starring a Skarsgård in this movie, did pretty bad. It made about $4.5 million. So funny to be like, that movie made no money and it made $4.5 million, but they spent a lot more on it. And then Blink Twice is this Zoe Kravitz directed Channing Tatum thriller. One of the only movies I've seen recently to do a lot of work to let people know about the content warnings that were in the movie. I saw Instagram posts from my local movie theaters that were saying, apparently there was a thing at the front of the movie saying that it was, these are the trigger warnings for the movie. This was supposed to be pretty like scandalous. It's like, it's just a sensitive a topic and it's a thriller. Both these movies did poorly to the fact that like Twisters did better than Crow. You know what also did better than The Crow? The re-release of Coraline in the 15th anniversary. This was not good. Deadpool, Wolverine, Alien, and It Ends With Us, the rom-com, all that's the podium for the box office this weekend. So neither of those two movies made it up. This is a dreadful time for movies, Taran. This is sort of the second dead window, the more notorious one being like basically January, February. This is also a bad time just because if even if your movie does well, it has no tail because kids are going to go like and already going back to, so they might already be back in school actually in some places in the States. So it's just a bad time to put out your movie in general. So it's likely why these movies were put there anyway. But I think just bad news that they did worse than movies that are already out and have been out for many weeks, some of which came out 15 years ago, Taran.
I mean, The Crow does not surprise me. It has received terrible reviews, pretty much. People not a big fan of The Crow. I think the marketing was not the best either. It just looks. I mean, the original The Crow was back in the '90s, and this looks like it's from the '90s in terms of like the style. So I don't know. That does not surprise me. Blink Twice, I've seen so much marketing for. It looks like a fun movie. I've heard it's a fun movie, but also seems to not be doing well enough here. And it kind of reminds me of like, I think there was a lot of talk about like Fall Guy and Furiosa and how those were movies that did not very well in the box office. There's, I don't know, maybe this style of movie feels very like what is it called, the Onion, Knives Out, feels very Knives Out to me, like a little bit of like fun murder mystery kind of thing. That's the vibe I got from the trailers. I try not to watch them, so I don't know for sure, but didn't do well. And so I don't know what the problem was with that one, but yeah,
I mean, again, I don't know that this time of year has exactly quite the same reputation in terms of like not going to the theater, but I do think that there's enough other stuff that you haven't seen yet. Between Deadpool and Wolverine won the weekend, and then Alien, Romulus, and it ends with Us. So you kind of, I think if you're going for like sort of even thrillery or rom-com, you kind of have your choice of what you want to go see already. And so this one, I will say, I thought that like once the movie, like this week, I thought there was a lot of marketing for it. I honestly looked earlier this week and was like, I don't think I've heard about this. And then it was Channing Tatum, directed by Zoe Kravitz. So, I mean, I would agree. I think this, and the other thing too, is just, I think we have to realize that people just, box office numbers might not be how we should completely, and I'm doing this, I'm like saying like, they failed at the box office, but probably not how we should actually be looking at certain movies, critical success in terms of like, this will probably be on streaming within, by the end of September. And if you want to watch it then, you can watch it then. So you can, video on demand it or whatever you want. Yeah.
I mean, I will say for myself, like, I thought, should I go to the movies this weekend? I could see something like Blink Twice. Looks like it's fun. And I was like, nah. But I did have a desire to go see Alien. Like, because Alien is a movie that like I think would really be fun to see in a theater versus at home. A movie like Blink Twice, not as much. I don't really need to see that in a theater. There's not really much of a point, especially if it's going to be on streaming soon. I watched Fall Guy at home. I was really glad I didn't go to the theater. I didn't like the movie very much.
You don't like Fall Guy?
I thought it was fine. It was just man, was a long opening segment. I felt like the movie didn't start until like 40 minutes in. So I think maybe there's part of it. I mean, that's it for me at least. Like no part of me felt like I needed to go see Blink Twice in theaters. I'll just watch it at home. So
if this wasn't like one of the busiest weekends I've had, I saw a wrestling show on Friday. I went to a live recording of the Handsome podcast on Saturday night with a friend, Lindsay Wilson. Shout out, listener of the pod. And then I was like, that's something I could go, but I chose not to. I chose not to go to the movies. So, yeah.
All right. What's next?
Lots of TV. There's a few things. Yeah. I'm actually kind of. So you and I are going to be covering Rings of Power. Should be a preview pod. A little preview pod, and then we'll be covering it. Excited for Rings of Power, but because we have the preview pod, hold up. There's two other shows that I'm interested. I think I know your opinion on one of these, not the other one. They're both returning for a season 4. Only Murders in the Building is returning,
Mhm.
which is going to be covered on the weekend program over there. I will probably be keeping up with it and will give my thoughts as the season is going along. That's a show I enjoy. The other one is, have you ever dabbled in Slow Horses, Taran, which I mentioned earlier in the show?
I did. I watched the first season of
Okay.
both of these shows.
Yeah. Okay.
Only
Fun.
Murders, I watched the first season. Slow Horses, I watched the first season. And so
And
you can kind of get a sense from the fact that I did not watch season 2 of either one of these shows. Actually, no, I did start season 2 of Slow Horses. Look at that.
oh,
Uh,
okay.
I
That's
because
even worse for me because I was going to try and sell you on it again, but
I watched the first season of Slow Horses. I was like, this is fine. This is like it's a fine enough time. I like I like this kind of show in general, but I started season 2 and I was just like, I just don't have the patience. It just requires too much of me.
okay,
Um,
that's fair. Let me. I mean, I do think this is a show that's gone a little bit under the radar, and I do think like season 3, I think was sort of what I kept hearing is like people who I don't feel like necessarily watch like a bunch of TV would be like, oh yeah, I watched the horse. We really liked it. We watched it. Like people at work, you know. And then Jess and I did it for full spoiler recaps. We did season 3, so I went back and watched all of it. Antonio Mazzaro is also a big fan of Slow Horses, and I feel like I had one of the most interesting television conversations in my whole life with Antonio, like about specifically Gary Oldman's character Jackson Lamb, who I think there is a thing that he's doing that I think he's one of the most interesting characters on television in terms of what he essentially is like a sleazeball, gross dude. Who and Slow Horses, the idea here is that they are all people who are like sort of for any number of reasons been sort of like kicked out of MI5, the sort of like British, Secret Service. They have been all put, so like they did something, they gambled or they were found to have cocaine on them or something basically like illegal or bad, that then they're like, you're not allowed to work actually in MI5, you're going to work in Slough House, who is then aka the Slow Horses. You sort of get pushed over there. And Jackson Lamb is sort of the central figure of that. And there's a way in which, as you start to watch the show, the question of, and it's not been answered as of yet, is his sort of like grossness and his demeanor, is that an act or a thing he puts on himself because of how he thinks he deserves? That's what he thinks he deserves, how he should be treated. I think it's really interesting. I think it's very good. I think it's a very good show that's sort of under the radar. Typically 6 episodes a season. So like, I know you were like, God, tough to get through. I found it like quite easy to get through, but I was also like on a little bit of like my own personal deadline of like, oh, I got to watch it all before we cover it. So I'm a little different. Yeah. I think if people don't check it out, if you find that it's, as Jess says, it might be too slow horses for you. If it's too slow, drop it. But I think it's worth checking out. I think it's a pretty well put together show. I think the seasons are pretty well contained in terms of the story they're trying to tell and what they're trying to do with a larger overarching story that I'm intrigued to like see what they do this season. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think as a litmus test here, like Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy
Yeah.
came out in 2011. I
Mm-hmm.
was pumped to see it back then. I graduated
Mm-hmm.
high school in 2010. I was a big fan, a recently big fan of Thomas Alfredson, who had just directed Let the Right One In, which is one of my favorite movies. And I was like, oh, this looks like a lot of fun. I'm going to watch this. 13 years later, I finally watched Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy because every time I tried to start watching it, I was too bored. It was too it takes too much effort to watch these like detailed
Okay.
spy movies and shows.
Interesting.
I
Interesting.
finally watched it. It's great. I loved it, but I really also loved that it was only 2 hours long. And so Slow Horses for me, unfortunately, at like 5 hours per season, and now we're into season 4. It's just too much of it for me. And I probably won't be able to watch the whole thing. But that's
No,
me.
you're good.
That's where I come from with that. I think that it is
Yeah.
a very high quality spy show. If you like that sort of thing, you'll probably like Slow Horses.
Yeah, I think it's a show that you kind of like, but it does take a while, and then suddenly you're like, oh my God, do I like actually care and love these people? Like these, like kind of like, they're not awful people. They're just not like, they're not stereotypically like, good, protagonists. But that's totally fair. I mean, it is a little slow-ish, because it's a spy drama. So
Yeah.
yeah, but I think
And
it's very,
then
very good, very well crafted.
Only Murders in the Building. I know people love this show.
I love this show, Taran. Be careful.
Yes, a lot of people love this show. At the end of the day, this one is just whereas Tinker Tailor, or sorry, not Tinker Tailor, Slow Horses is like a genre I can enjoy. Uh, Only Murders just did not work for me. I'm not like a true crime person. So like I think
Mm.
that they really delve into that world. This like, serial the podcast kind of thing where it's like, oh, did this person do a thing? Let's do a podcast, a true crime podcast. Like that's just not really what I like. I just haven't been able to like find a good bite into that. And so all automatically, like it's not really my scene. And then like, on top of that, I just wasn't enjoying it. It was like, this is fine. Um, but also again, just like it's taking too long. There's 10 episodes in season one. Like, that's too many episodes for this kind of show for
Every
me.
season. Every season.
It's every season. There you go. 10 episodes in
Yeah.
every season. Again, it's like that means 5.5 hours of Only Murders in the Building. And I just felt like, is there enough content to justify that from my perspective? Not really. But a lot of people love this show. So I would certainly not recommend it.
Yeah, I do love it. I am a like a huge Steve Martin fan. If you haven't watched the Steve Martin documentary that's on, I believe, Apple, I could be wrong about that. It's just called Steve. It's Steve, lowercase and then an exclamation mark. It's very good. First half is basically his stand-up career, and the second half is his basically movie and subsequent career. It is very, very good. Martin Short, there's some stuff of Martin Short and Steve Martin working out material in it that I think is like fascinating to watch these two people like kind of be like, they'll say a joke and they'll laugh and they'll be like, yeah, it's probably not good, huh? And then they throw it out. It's just interesting. I do love this. I think I love the dynamic of Steve Martin, Martin Short, and Selena Gomez. I'm also a big Martin Short fan. Gotta back my Canadians. It is pretty silly and like whimsical, and so I think that there's a way in which like I think even Martin Short, as much as I love him, he kind of went viral for a bit because like someone like tweeted out that they did not like him and then everyone sort of defended him, but I do think it's understandable if you're a bit like off the Martin Short train. He can be like a lot, I think. And Selena Gomez, I think there was this whole thing where like she wasn't getting nominated for Emmys, which she finally has done, which felt like a little bit like, you're going to nominate those two guys, but not her. Blah, blah. I think she holds her own in terms of like the dynamic of the three of them and her performance in the show. I think this is one of the shows that's funny where like they do have to every season be like, another murder, which is like, yeah, if you're going to extend the murder mystery show, it becomes a little silly to think that like within this universe, this many people have died. But they kind of know that too. And it is a comedy. I think they know what they're doing. I really like this show. I enjoy it. It has tonality. Like it kind of, I feel like the vibe of it is very unique, I think. And I like Only Murders a lot. So I'm excited to check out season 4 and mostly that Josh and Antonio will be chatting about the episodes as they come out on the weekend program. So yeah.
Yeah. There's some more shows coming out. One that I noticed upcoming. It's got Jeff Goldblum in the poster. I was like, oh, what's going on here? It's called Chaos with a K, and it's by Charlie Koval, who was the creator of The End of the World, which was a fun show. I enjoyed that show. Also did Humans further back. So well-known show creator, has made some good stuff before. And it's basically like they call it on IMDb a modern day contemporary retelling of Greek mythology, as discord reigns on Mount Olympus and almighty Zeus spirals into paranoia. Three mortals are destined to reshape the future of humankind. But it's like a comedy. And so like Jeff Goldblum is playing Zeus, and he's like the image here is that he's like grilling. like it's like a modern, like very much a modern retelling of, so it's like I don't know if anybody watched this. It was like I think like a New Zealand show about like old gods and like modern people embodying gods. It's kind of seemingly has that vibe, but I don't know. This looks like it could be a lot of fun. It's coming out on Netflix this week, so
Yeah.
I think worth giving a shot, worth checking out here. I'm curious.
The cast here is fun. David Thewlis, who I quite love, Debbie Mazar, and Eddie Izzard all in the show. So that's fun. I'm excited to check. Always like it when it's like, yeah, all these people, and then it's like, oh, David Thewlis is Hades, Debbie Mazar is Medusa. That's fun.
Yeah.
Did you watch Good Omens, Taran? It's Good Omens.
I did. That's one I have not finished, but I'm gonna go back to for sure.
I think also we're checking out, but that one is like, I mean, that's the sort of like, game and
Similar
thing
vibe.
of like, playing with, like, what if there's an angel here, and they're for real actual angel, I feel like that's kind of fun to play in. So I'll check out Chaos. They're gonna drop it all at once probably. It's gonna be annoying, but that's fine.
So. Yeah.
That's fine. Jeff Goldblum. Jeff Goldblum. Very fun.
Yeah. Fun stuff. Of course, Pachinko, we said was coming out, has now released its first episode, which people are already saying is very good. I still have not checked any of Pachinko out, but people are saying like, hey, it's still crushing. It's still doing very well, and so this is really like trying to claim a spot in the like really good show echelon of television history. So at some point, I'm sure we'll get around to that.
Yeah, I gotta check out Pachinko. I've heard good things. Yeah.
Yep. And then of course we mentioned Lord of the Rings, and Terminator Zero also.
Yeah, and another Netflix show, right? I think Terminator Zero. Yeah. There's a lot of stuff
so,
coming out this fall. The next few weeks and throughout the fall, there's a lot of interesting stuff. Did you check Terminator Zero? Did you check out Arcane? Did you check out Arcane season 2?
I did watch Arcane.
It might be November now, but yeah.
Yes. I thought Arcane was like, I appreciate what it did.
A hot take, Taran. I think
the story itself didn't really do much for me. The animation was really fun. I'm also not like a League of Legends player. I'm pretty sure that's what it was. But I thought it was fine. But notably, the creator of Terminator Zero, Matthew Tomlin, I believe recently was talking about how like he feels like the show doesn't need to, like, Terminator can exist without like the Connors, and how they can move away from like the old way of talking about the Terminator, and how they can lean more into like the horror aspect of the story, and move away from like the established, we must be talking about the same plot line over and over.
That's exactly what we were talking about at the beginning. You don't have to be attached
so it's
to the
like
lore.
very relevant to what we were talking about, and I'm very curious to see if that approach is successful here with Terminator Zero.
I mostly am interested in hearing what Josh Wigler thinks. Josh Wigler has a bit of like an origins, like a movie origin story thing with Terminator. He saw Terminator 2 in theaters way too young. So when Josh Wigler returns from gallivanting across the world, we'll get his input as to how Terminator Zero is.
Yeah. All right. Anything else before we wrap up here?
No, next week. I think next weekend is Beetlejuice. I don't think there's really anything coming out this weekend movie wise. So we hit most of the TV shows, but yeah, I believe next, or maybe it is this upcoming. No, I think it's next weekend. Yes. No, next weekend. Yeah. Beetlejuice. Saw a great Beetlejuice at Fan Expo, but yeah.
All right. Well, that's what we have for you this week then. We will be back next week. I'm definitely going to check out Chaos, so I'll let you know how that goes. Terminator Zero we'll give a shot, and then we'll start our coverage of Lord of the Rings as well. So plenty there. We will also have a little preview for you of Lord of the Rings if you need a little bit of a refresher, a little bit of a preview for Rings of Power as we get into season 2. I know I do. I'm like, I definitely watched the first season, but do I remember all of the things? I'm not sure. Let's find out. Let's listen to the preview together. And in the meantime, check out the industry coverage happening as well. I'm still hearing good things about season 3, Grace.
Yes, Jess and I chatted about episode 3. If you like Joel Kim Booster, you should watch. Like, if you like Joel Kim Booster, like if you like him, you should watch Industry episode 3. There was a Jon Snow butt appearance, as Jess is pointing out.
Oh.
Yeah, there's a lot happening on Industry, and that's just the stuff that, like, you know, I'm like eyes emoji at. There was actually like real good character content too on the show. So Industry has been very good so far. I think it's living up to its promotion of a Sunday night show, Taran.
All right. Well,
yeah,
that's what we have for you then this week on the Tastemakers. Thank you all so much for joining us, and we will see all of you next time.